So I wanted to take this moment to welcome you to our session today on the learning environment and risky play. I am happy to welcome you and welcome our guest expert, Dr. Emily Hayes. And Emily, would you like to introduce yourself a bit?
Sure. I am Emily Hayes, and I just recently completed my doctorate in educational leadership from the American College of Education. And I'm presently working at Istanbul International Community School as their PYP coordinator. Love the role, love the opportunity to support teachers, which I hope I have the opportunity to do today. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And if you're watching online later in a recording, if you have any questions at the end, I'll share my email and I'm happy for you to get in touch then.
Fantastic, thank you.
So I'm going to start with Loris Malaguzzi, who's guided lots of my thinking as I've grown as an early childhood professional. If you've done any research into the Reggio Emilia approach, you should be familiar with this name and the concept that the environment is the third teacher. So Malaguzzi said the environment should act as an aquarium, which reflects the ideas, ethics, attitudes, and culture of the people who live in it. This is what we are working towards. And I thought today, with the idea of the learning environment and risky play, this would be a perfect place to start. When we think about this quote, I love the concept of the aquarium. If you go into a doctor's office, often the aquarium is there. And why? To help soothe and comfort, right? And I think when you have a nurturing environment, that's part of what you have. You have that feel of comfort and just a place where you belong, where you're supposed to be. So in those regards, I'd like for you to think, oh, I've got a snap. Do you have an all snap as well?
Yes, an aw snap.
Yes, snap. All right. So then I want you just to think about in your program, what would be 3 words? If you envision the ideal classroom environment, what would be 3 words to describe that environment? Think for a second, since the all snap is there. I want you to just think for a moment. And since we're a small group today, maybe just share out your 3 words. What are your 3 words?
The first one is natural. The second one is engaging. And the third word I'm still thinking about, I think I would say something to the effect of, child-centered, in that they can move around and explore and have that freedom.
I hear ownership in that, Tots. I do think, right, like it's that shared space. I love where Malaguzzi said the people who live in it. And I think oftentimes when I first started as an educator, the environment was mine to prepare for the children. And as I've grown in my professional understanding, I don't see it that way anymore. I see it as a shared space, and that it belongs really to the children first, because they're the ones who need to learn and grow in there. Amy, did you have 3 words you thought of?
I do, and I have some connections with you as well, Tats. I said child-centered when I wrote it down. However, I took a different angle towards it. I thought child-centered meaning based on their interests. So if you walk into an early childhood classroom, you can kind of see what the children are interested in learning about at any given moment. And it will change throughout the course of a school year, throughout the course of a month, whatever it might be. I think it's really important in an early childhood classroom to have real items. So instead of having a plastic tea kettle, bring in a real tea kettle. It can be a steel tea kettle. It could be something that it's not going to break very easily, but it's real, right? And then calm. All too often, classrooms have too much visual stimulation in them, meaning there's too many things on the walls, too many toys, keeping it really calm so that way children have that sense of calm when they're in the room, as well as having a space where they can go to help regulate their emotions as well. when they need it.
Mhm, mhm.
Oh.
Oh, I think both of you spoke to so many, and I think one of the things to know is there's not a right or wrong answer. I think child-centered should be the leading aspect of it, that what we are creating is child-centered. So as I looked online and prepared this presentation, this was one of the very first pictures that I was like, oh, this, I want to be a child and be in this place. I love the lighting, right? That there's actual natural light. So Tots, when you said natural, I'm the same. I like the natural. My first kindergarten, everything was in the primary colors, right? Red, yellow, and blue, the posters on the wall that were prefab, Carson DeLosa. And with time, I realized, just like Amy's just referenced, that a lot of that's just visual distraction. They have
Yeah.
no meaning. And not only that, I put it all up. And so they had no connection to it. So going back to that child-centered piece. Also, Amy, as you alluded to, the authentic materials. And even in this picture, you can see the tea kettle in the background there, kind of like on the stovetop, right? That you don't have to go buy a plastic tea kettle to make it a child-friendly one. The children, they want to have access to those materials, and especially in a dramatic play center like this, where they're taking on the roles of the grown-ups, right? If you give them, I love dropping an old cell phone in the dramatic play center, because the children, they know exactly what to do, right? They're tapping and touching. So yes, I think authentic, natural, but child-centered, I believe, is at the heart of it. We referenced earlier that Malaguzzi called the environment the third teacher. So if that is true, then how much positive power do you allow your environment to have? The environment, I chose this picture here because the environment exceeds the classroom as well. And I think that's one of the beauties in Reggio, is that the classroom isn't contained within four walls, but it does include the outside environment as well. One of the things I'd like for us to keep in mind is that the environment isn't just the physical space. The environment is the attitude, the ethos that you bring into the environment, and the culture that you create among the children. So pretty complex, but also very real in my mind. I think sometimes I keep things overly simple, but I think if you think of it through the eyes of a child, that's what we need to keep, right? To keep that simplicity. When Amy mentioned earlier about it being a crowded space or overly busy, minimalist is one of the things that came to my mind, where less is more, that concept. So you don't crowd, you don't have to have every nook and cranny filled with something to entertain the children.
Yeah.
So take a look at this space. And many of the images you'll see that look like this may be familiar to you because they're from Community Playthings. And Community Playthings is a great resource if you have, I see Tots nodding, if you have a grand budget for building an early child-centered center. But also I think it gives me ideas, because I don't. I've worked in schools where you have almost a zero budget, but ways that you can create your environment. And I want you just to examine for a moment this space and share, what do you think creates the inviting feel of this space? What are some things that you see in this that makes it inviting?
Well, I love the way they separate the space, that, for a teacher, you can still see who's sitting behind the space. So, if, there's any discipline, refocusing that needs to happen. But at the same time, the spaces are clearly delineated and it looks real, like you mentioned before. It's, got real couches, just child size, real table and plates. And it just, makes me want to be there.
And welcome, Maria. Please join in. We're a small group today, so thanks for joining us.
Everyone, I had technical difficulties, was trying to join in for the last 20 minutes.
Oh.
Just to go on what Ted said, it's also inviting for the children because they could see through, but not quite clearly, so you can go and explore behind.
Yes, yeah, good point. Hi, Maria, nice to see you.
Nice to see you guys.
I also really appreciate that this picture has plants, flowers, and there's not, like, I don't know because you can't see above, but you can see that the lights are turned on. You've got two table lamps And for me, I always in my classroom learning environments, don't turn on all the fluorescent lights. To me, I think that's way too harsh. And I always love having different sources of light because those overhead lights can be a bit much sometimes.
That goes back to when you initially talked about a calming environment, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think this has that calmness. I look at the little pillow propped up beside the little boy who's chosen to sit in the seat, but he could flop on a pillow, right? I think
Yeah.
this indicates choice. There's choice in the spaces. I love, like you said as well, Tots, that the spaces they're purposeful, right? Like they're already been designated and not by tape on the floor necessarily. Now, you may have to do that, right? If you don't have the furnishings to create those spaces, but there's spaces that are delineated for purposes. I would imagine that's the reading center that the little boy is sitting in. I love on the far right on the walls where there's framed, it looks like student artwork, right? There's not the Carson DeLosa poster that's got the alphabet, right? But it's their work that's being valued. So I see their voice in this picture. Another thing I think, Maria, you kind of alluded to, those transparent films that are used so that you can still see, and the children, they still feel a part. I think even if they were in that little space beside where the girl is standing, if they were the only one sitting there, they would know there were others on the other side if they were playing. And Tots, I think it's so important when you mentioned that everyone's still visible. I think back to my first few years, and the shelves were so tall. And how could I ensure safety when I couldn't see over the shelf unless I was there? And I
Yeah.
think a healthy environment, a teacher can stand pretty much anywhere in the room and scope it out and know everyone is safe. So one of the things I wanted to share with you, and I think this is a good place to pull it out, are 3 big ideas that I think we should consider that our learning environment should speak to. And those include respect, being respectful of the student. And that's that element that both Tots and Amy, you mentioned, that we want our classrooms to be child-centered. That's who they're being created for, and not just for, but with. And I think that's the big part of the respect, that I'm not the creator of the space, but I co-construct it with my learners. It's ours. Another element is the intention. We intentionally design the space, whether it's to organize, like we just talked about, choosing the shelves that we put, the materials that we make accessible, so that there's intention there. And also that we're responsive. I think, Amy, you may have mentioned this earlier that it responds to the children's interests. It's not a stagnant environment that, oh, it's beautiful and we've created it and now it stays like this for the next 180 school days. But no, it's responsive to the children's needs, and that we can actually move furniture. We can ask that one piece of furniture be moved out completely and put on hold for us to have later in the year. Also just adding materials into the classroom. So we're going to dig a little deeper into these 3 considerations. First, the idea of being respectful. And again, this to me goes back to the Reggio Emilia approach. And it was probably the most profound learning that I took away, not only in my studies, but in my visit, was the respect, the aspect of respect. And I think this is a mind shift for early childhood educators. And it's not to say that we haven't respected children in the past, but I think it's the respect for the power, the competencies, the ideas, all that they bring to the table as not being empty vessels, that we're respectful of them as capable constructors of understandings and the environment. And in that respect, I believe we need to also consider 3 different things in how we prepare our classroom. First is the space itself. What does your space allow for? We do have limitations. I look at the classrooms here on one of our campuses, and they're teeny, teeny, tiny. And so their space goes from the classroom into the little pod space outside. And so having that creative approach to the space that we have, you may have a very large space, kudos and congratulations, because I don't think that's the norm for most early childhood educators. So how can you be creative with this space that you have? Oftentimes, you don't have the authority to knock down a wall and make a larger classroom, right? So how can you be responsive and respectful to, this is what I have to work with, and this is how my children can use it. I remember my first kindergarten overseas in Abu Dhabi in a proprietary school, and I had 16 kindergarten students in a room that was about the size of your typical bathroom. And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And you can't change it. So how do you figure out how to work with your space? How do you think creatively about it? And maybe even managing the numbers of students. Maybe my colleague had a larger classroom. So I would just have a morning meeting with my kids. And then could we make small groups from there? And you have 2 in your room and I have 1 in mine, and we shuffle, right? So thinking creatively about the space you have. And along with that, whoop, we've got both of them together. So the organization of the space. In the previous picture from Community Playthings, one of the things that I noted was that it allowed for a nice flow. That's one of the things that's always been so very important to me, especially with children with big behaviors. If you teach boys, anyone here teach boys, right? They need room. They need that room to move. And the way you place the large furniture does make a difference, right? Like we do have to be real that a piece of furniture that you think is great placed here because it creates a new space, but you know it's a path to go to the bathroom, right? You need to rethink, how do you place that and organize the furnishings so that it allows for a flow. I walked through my classroom right at the beginning of the school years. I would imagine being a child and walking through, how does this encourage me to move from one space to another? Honest to goodness, it's your floor plan. And before I would even go into my classroom and move furniture, I would sit like an architect and create a floor plan. So take the time to do that because it is important. I think it also influences the behaviors that you see in your classroom. So keep that in mind. And finally, the materials. In your classroom, what materials do you make accessible? Amy, you should love this because they're all real materials, right?
Yep.
Right, Todd? The little trinket box with the handles that really turn. They see them on their door. Screws and screwdrivers and nuts and bolts. What materials do you provide to the students? And it's funny when we think of these types of things with those limited budgets, these are things that you can probably get at a hardware store at pennies in comparison to what you would pay for the child-friendly toys that you could purchase. Right.
Yep.
And I think that is part of that mindset that we have to shift, that it doesn't have to be a product created by Hasbro or so. Like this is, bring reality into your classrooms. And like we said earlier, maybe it's a broken item, but that broken
Oh.
item allows them to explore and take apart.
That totally makes sense, since kids are going to be making sense of the world when they're playing, that the world should be real.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And why do we want them to have the contrived? And especially when that's a hardship for us as a teacher, that I don't have the resources. And I think too, when you're in the international school, those local resources are always much more affordable than your overseas orders, right? So keep those types of things in mind. And because I do believe it is more of, for educators, that mental shift of thinking about things differently, that I don't need to create an international order. How about I create a local order of, a kilogram of nuts and a kilogram of bolts, right? Your dollars will go much further, I guarantee you.
Yep.
So this is from Reggio. I'm going to encourage you to take just a moment to read through it, and then I want you to share what insights you've gotten from it.
Did you turn a page?
Oh, sorry. That's
There
what
we go.
happens when I work on 2 different.
Thank you.
Any thoughts?
It really reminded me of what I've heard about Japanese schools and how the students are responsible for cleaning. And I think we do a disservice when we don't have the kids be engaged in taking care of the space, beyond just cleaning it up, after we play. It's something I didn't think of. And in India, where the children are incredibly coddled, it will give them a real sense of agency to be responsible for something like this.
But also the students can plan the class, and they can, like, you can teach them. There is a lot of teaching moments there when you can teach them to do risk assessments. You can teach them to draw the floor plans. Well, this year when I moved to a new school and I had to start the new year for open house with parents for 3 hours with only tables and chairs because our order of furniture from IKEA got stuck for a week. That just created an opportunity for them to imagine what they would like to have. And then had what was that? 12 completely different plans of what they want to do. And then magically in 3 days, we've got some shelves, and we were not moving it with them, but we were trying to figure out, look, we have this and this and this, where should they go? So when they went to recess, we moved it around. That was not that much furniture anyway. And then when they came, they felt it is their classroom. And then I put on one table all the learning materials that we had. That was about probably 4 boxes of things. That's it. So we had to think thoughtful about where we are going to put it. And then, because again, it's a new school, there was a lot of unpacking. So we had a lot of boxes, and we thought, like, should we throw them away or should they be here? Can we build something with them? So right now my construction area is full of boxes. And there was kind of, I like natural materials, but this year it wasn't even a choice for me, because right now, apart from those 4 manufactured toys that we have, like, I've brought half of the beach and half of the forest into the classroom. And
it's funny listening to you, because I think you received unexpected gifts.
Yeah.
And you accepted them that way.
Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, like, it was a little bit blind, like it was really difficult to transition. Well, you, like Emmy and Tats, know the resources of the Anglo-American school, right? So you come from that place where you just wish and it's there, to a place where if you wish, you can probably wait for half a year, even if it's a local order. And there is not that much reason to wish, because most likely the order would not be delivered anyway by the end of the year. So you just go and do it.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that it also helps children to appreciate what they have.
Well, I think that you bring up a really good point, Maria, that these kinds of opportunities teach us to get outside of our regular routines. You know what I mean? Even though you would, I imagine, always have a child-focused classroom, it brought it to a whole new level. And I would be fascinated to know how that changes the students' sense of agency and focus and enjoyment of the environment by the fact that they were critical in setting it up.
Now, I was
Well,
thinking,
it also changed dramatically the attitude of the parents, because, like, we have very demanding parents in the private school, and they wanted to come and see everything that they paid for, and there was nothing. And so you just explained to them that was the purpose, because your children are going to do it. And they were like, whoa, that's because, again, for them, it's a very different approach as well. They've never thought about it. So, I mean, it was nerve tickling, but it worked.
nerve tickling is a great word.
That is a very
when
great
you were saying
word.
that, I thought that sense of belonging that you referenced, right? Just because, kind of like, you didn't have a head start, that you all started the year on the same page, you and the children. And I love that aspect of that it challenged your parents' thinking, because it
Mhm.
is so true. And I think oftentimes, and Tots, you might can speak to this, but I've been in schools where my principals have expected there to be bulletin boards beautifully prepared. And
Yeah.
I don't believe that's true, because again, if I did that, then it's Emily's bulletin board. It's not ours as a community. So I think helping the children's parents see that, wow, I think for you to have, I feel like you've taken a risk, right? To just involve them and help them see that. Because I do think, and culturally, there are norms sometimes too, that I'm paying this money, so I should get this, and there should be this quality of material accessible in the classroom. And helping parents see the valuable learning that goes on, that's almost invaluable, right? Like you can't provide some of that learning. Like I love that you've got the boxes in the construction center. And if you could help those parents, even if you send home via Seesaw or whatever tools you use, to show the learning and attach it to concepts of measuring and things they value, but let them see it through the child's eyes and the early childhood educator eyes. I think you've got a wonderful opportunity, not one that you asked for, and not one that came without challenges, I'm sure. But it sounds like you've seized those opportunities, and I'm so proud of you, Maria, and so grateful on behalf of your students and their parents that you could share that understanding and that lens with them.
We'll see where it will take us. I think the kids get in there. Well, parents are on my side already. That's half of the problem solved. So
Exactly.
Super true. So
Exactly.
true. So true.
Well, and
For
the fact
sure. For
the
sure.
fact that you're bringing, like, you don't have a lot of materials, but you're bringing the outside inside when you can, is amazing. We've had to
Mhm.
do that this year. We've had delays on lots of orders to come in. I have a
Mhm.
group of 3 to 5-year-olds who love cutting. Well, I'm only going to give you like paper that's half used, like one side is used and it's just in the recycling bin. I'm not going to give you fresh paper to just sit and cut, but they can go through a ream of paper. Like they cut all day, every day. And so I took them outside and I said, let's collect some leaves and some twigs. They didn't know why they were collecting leaves and twigs. We put them in the sensory bin and I stuck some scissors in there. They were shocked that cutting leaves and twigs and grass, it went from something that was this big down to something that was this big, and trying to understand that something just changed form and it went from being giant to being tiny. And why did that happen? Because it was a leaf. The leaf was this big because we have some giant leaves, and now it's like this much. So some really
this-
good
I do
scientific
think-
conversations.
And Amy, it's so true what you've talked about, that idea of cause and effect that adults take for granted, right? Like we've lived, we know these kinds of things. And I think that the typical parents, they don't see the learning the way an early childhood professional sees the learning, right? Because we value those foundational concepts and skills that are taken for granted later. And so parents, they want to see the math mastery of being able to add, right, with fluency, and helping them understand you're looking at the world still through adult eyes, and let's look at it through the child's perspective, and help them see that magnificent learning that's taking place.
Yeah.
One of the things in this quote that I did appreciate was the aesthetic sense. And I think aesthetic to me is a part of, Tots, you said it earlier, the natural. Amy, you referenced the greenery. In this image, this is one of the reasons I chose this one. It was more for the plants. I've just been in my apartment for 5 weeks, and it's one of the first things I shopped for, plants, right? Like it's that natural life, but also it's something that we have to care for. And so sharing that idea that we care. Another reason I chose this one is because that curtain in the back, right? That it's not perfect, right? It is what it is, that it's reality, and it's a child's world. And what might annoy me as that person who's a little bit of a perfectionist, and I think those corners should be tacked up, I have to keep in perspective that what do the children see? And they may see that as completely intriguing and trying to figure out why is it dark on where the fold is. And so that gives that opportunity for learning, right? That how light moves through transparent and translucent materials. And so what opportunities are provided that allows them to kind of inquire into their own understandings. So this picture to me is almost perfect from the teacher mind, except for that curtain. And then I just step back and say, wow, I wonder what they're wondering about that. I wonder if they've noticed it first, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if I asked a question, would that have us go down an inquiry into how light works and moves, right? Another one, when we talk about the intention and the purpose, and this is another, I'm sure you guys have been in early childhood classrooms where there are materials set up. And I love another concept from the Reggio Emilia approach, the loose parts. Because again, those are materials that are accessible from parents' junk, right? You send home that letter that says, send us your wine corks if you're in a country where there's wine, right? Send us in your seashells when you get home from the beach. Even in the background here, that little branch that has the twinkly lights on it, right? I'm sure someone just trimmed branches in the neighborhood and someone brought that in. I also love this picture because it ties in the literature. I do think having literature accessible in most places where children need to take a break, maybe they're overly stimulated by the play in the moment. And I think you ladies all know in the construction center that can happen often. So if you provide those resources that are just books and of different levels, this one, it looks like there may be storybooks, but there are also some nonfiction to help them kind of understand and dig a little deeper into concepts that go along with construction. So now let's chat a little bit about intentional space. When I say the word intention, what comes to mind for you? When you think of the learning environment and intention, what do you think of?
Some kind of learning provocations that you're thinking that like you have a potential learning point where you want the kids to get, but it's not fixed. So the kids can actually get you anywhere they feel like.
Yeah. And to build on that, Maria, too, take their interests and learning to the next step by putting something intentionally in a space.
Mm-hmm.
So respectful and intentional. We've talked about respectful. The intention, oftentimes when I think about this, I wondered what materials are accessible, right? Like I think sometimes when I first walk into a classroom in an international school it's mine for the first time, it's ours, mine and the children, sometimes everything is accessible. Everything's on the shelves. Shelves are packed, right? The bingo games and the number cards and everything. Oftentimes that is publishing company generated or teacher created, those types of things. And I'm a firm believer in purging. I'll just put that out there, right? Like get rid of the unnecessary things that don't actually support children's learning. Get rid of them. And when I say that, literally get rid of, don't just store them away for the next teacher in case they won't. Don't tell your principal I said that. Close your ears, Tots. But get rid of them, right? There's a lot of junk in classrooms that have been around for a long time. And it's that idea of being resourceful. And when I say get rid of them, it may be share them with a local school who has no resources. Yeah. Or reuse them, repurpose them for something else. Give them to your art teacher, right? If you have a Ramita center or right, like something, but get them out of your space, right? And then make accessible what you want children to be able to access without the boundaries, right? If you don't want them to access the Unifix cubes right now, don't put them out for the child, right? Like don't make it a temptation for them. Go ahead. And when we talked about behavior earlier, that's part of it. Don't put things where they are accessible, but they're not, right? Like being very clear with what you make accessible to students. And then how and where are they displayed? If you're displaying something you want them to access, make sure they're on shelves where they are accessible. Don't put them on the top of a shelf for 2-year-olds that they have to climb onto the bottom shelves to get to, right? Like just kind of common sense, make sure they are accessible. And where, maybe this is something that's going to be outside for now. And when I say this, it doesn't mean it's stagnant, that you choose this and it's always there. This is the idea of being intentional, that there are times that it's not going to be needed. So the material environment you create, it's not a one go thing, right? It's always changing to respond to the children's needs. And finally, the element of being child-centered, who decides? Who decides what's accessible? Who decides how and where they should be displayed? It doesn't always have to be you. Honestly, it shouldn't always be just you. Involve the children in that. If you share your room, I think this is one that's often forgotten, but say our Turkish teachers come into our kindergarten classrooms. Have I made a space for them? And do they know how and what's accessible when in our classroom? Is it okay for children to go and pull out the blocks to build when you're in here for Turkish? And it may be that conversation with those other teachers who are using your space, but I think it should be, I think that common understanding of all adults who share the space provides that consistency for the children, and they need consistency, right? We all know the children need the consistency. And it's the same if you have an assistant, right? Teachers' assistants and teachers should work collaboratively to develop agreements for how our space is used by ourselves as adults, and most particularly as for our children. How do they use them? This is just a quick example of how a teacher has created a space that's inviting. There's great intention here. There are the loose parts. Just how she's created the display, to me, says, oh, come and play, right? Amy talked about using the scissors, and I see scissors there. I think it implies, I look and I see all of these little beads and things, but there's glue there, so I can go and glue, right? Too much glue, if you know the book. But there's that, it's an invitation. The teacher doesn't have to use any words, but the space there says, come and create. Come and look. Maybe the teacher has read the most magnificent thing to the class, and now she's made it available for the children to kind of reflect and look at. If she hasn't, it's there. Maybe a child will ask her to read. Maybe the child will read and use their own language to create their own stories. But all of this is there, and it's set up. Just the way it's set up says come. And that's what we want our environment to say. I think, again, about for child behavior, if our environment is one that's inclusive and it invites those children to play, it shows purpose in how it's displayed, the opportunities are displayed, then our behaviors kind of diminish. Any comments on this before we head on?
Just the word inviting. That's such a perfect way to describe it.
Right. And I think if we think of it that way, how does it invite children? And it may just be displaying that book there. Looking to the far right where there's those couple of, looks like cylinder blocks standing up. So it kind of shows a start, but not you have to go down this road to get to where you've got to go. Oftentimes, maybe someone has taken the beads and added them to look like a face, right? But just kind of giving that prompting of what you could do. Not what you should do, but what you could do. So we've talked about respectful and intentional. And intentional often, I think, teeter-totters with being responsive, because your environment should be responsive, responding to the needs and interests of your children. Another quote from the Reggio site. You want to take a second and read there. I love the concept of live and research together. That is ultimately, I often call part of that idea of environment being the culture that you create. My classroom is, we're a family, right? The people in it, that we're a family, so that we live and we do research together. The interconnectedness.
Sorry, go ahead, Maria.
No, please.
The word interconnected really resonated with me. That we don't always think about. We always think about, you know, the drama center, the building center. But, you know, it should be interconnected because that's how they're gonna interact with it. They're gonna go from space to space.
It's true. I remember that was a battle I would fight in my early years, right? Like, no, you're supposed to be in the housekeeping center. That doesn't go over to the construction center. Right. And I'm like, now I think back, why? Why did
Yeah.
that matter? Right? Why did that matter? And
I
part of it was that perfectionist idea and what I perceived as order and right, as opposed to being open to the children's learning and their exploration of materials and space. I love that idea that the environment interacts, modifies, and takes shape,
Yeah.
right? That the environment is an organic part of our craft. It's not, when I talked about it earlier, being stagnant, that you create this beautiful space and it's ready for the children. No, right? And I think that's what, you know, that back to school night that you were talking about, Maria, right? Like that's not our ultimate goal, that we've got a beautiful space ready for children. But we've got this, again, a third teacher that interacts with the children, that takes shape in response to their needs and their interests. I also love the idea of the architecture, right? That dialogue between architecture and pedagogy. I think that's kind of the root of that, right? So this was an opportunity, if we'd had others here, I wanted to pose for you, and maybe you just choose one. All right, there are 3 of you here, but we were going to do breakout rooms. So this idea of planning for placemaking for children to grow in their own identities, develop that inclusive community, and engage in authentic, meaningful learning. I think in early childhood centers, I've tried to choose things that are typical, right? Typical observations you might make of children. But also then that breakout room 3, that prompts that we do have learning goals, right, that we have to address. And I think sometimes there is that disconnect with the early childhood teacher who is very Reggio and everything's child-centered, and so I can't do learning goals. That's so right. But the learning goals, if you're in a good program, they are developmentally appropriate learning goals. And we do have a role. It maybe is just changing our thinking of that we create an environment that helps children demonstrate those, as opposed to seeing ourselves as the disseminator of all knowledge, right? But we create that environment that helps them actually explore those concepts, apply them, make their own theories, question them, find misconceptions. And maybe our role is to ask the question or to clarify the misconception that they developed, right? So I've tried to choose 3 different scenarios here. Maria, is that a puppy? You and your puppy want to take one of these?
Yeah, he just wants to join. So I just had to pause for a second to go help him down the stairs. Just learning his new space. He took the stairs, but was scared to go down.
But perfect for this environment, right? Learning about his space. That's what we're talking about today. On cue. So take a moment. Amy, would you like to choose a breakout room to maybe give us your ideas about how you would respond in creating your environment to respond to one of these prompts?
I'm happy to do any of them. Do you have a preference of which one I do?
No, does anyone have a preference?
No.
I think we all will go with Amy.
Okay, all right. So on my screen, I see Amy as 1, Tots as 2, and Maria as 3. How about that?
Okay.
That works.
So Amy 1, Tots 2, Maria 3, and just give it
Alrighty.
a thought, and then whoever's ready first can jump in and share.
All right,
How
I'll
would you
go.
respond?
Yep.
Okay.
So 3 toddlers in your class are expecting new siblings at home. So for me, that naturally would make me think, okay, that dramatic area, we're going to have some baby dolls. We're going to have baby bottles available. We're going to have clothing. We're going to have some diapers available. We're going to have just materials that they're going to see at home. A little rocking chair that they can sit and pretend and rock a baby doll in. And so it's that whole bit of these are things you're going to start seeing happening at home. How do you, mommy's going to feed the baby, but maybe daddy will get to feed the baby with a bottle. Maybe you get to feed the baby with a bottle. And so beginning to normalize what it is they're going to experience, because toddlers are very me, egocentric. And so that too, and helping them to realize that sometimes they have to share mommy and daddy's attention. And how does that
Sharing
look?
is massive. Yes, sharing at that age, because I think we all know cognitively, right? Sharing, they're not prepared for that. And the concept of sharing something as abstract as time, right? Mommy's time is going to be shared is so tricky.
And then go into their play and start behaving as a real baby will behave for that doll, like actually giving you nerve breakdowns.
So
Yeah.
true, so true. But I think it is like validating those feelings for them too,
Yeah.
right? Like talking about it, reading stories about, the
Mhm.
baby that comes in. I think of, Junie B. Jones, A Little Monkey Business, when the little monkey was born right in the hospital.
And then Kevin Henke's book, Julius, Baby of the World.
Yes, yeah.
And giving
also
the giving young
Go on,
children ideas as to, if mommy and daddy are busy, what can you do? Because they have the
Mm.
baby. Like, what can you do when mommy and daddy can't pay attention to you for this moment?
That's a good one. Yeah.
And it also might be really good for the kids to see their own pictures as babies, if you can ask their own families to just put around that center, so they will kind of have a connection with this newborn. I was like that before. I mean, it's difficult for toddlers, but like seeing themselves
Yeah.
helps.
And it
No, I
also,
think that's true.
sorry, it also brings up the discussion of what I can do. I am 2
Yeah.
years old. I can do this. When I was 1 year old, I couldn't do this, but I could do this. And so it's
Yeah.
kind of getting kids to wrap their head around, wow, I'm a big kid. There's a lot I can do that I couldn't do before.
And going
Yeah.
back to Maria's thoughts about the baby pictures, I think most early childhood educators now have those pictures from first day, right? But even if you just had mom and dad send in a baby picture for each one, so everyone has that direct connection that we all were there at one time. And I think in that same like you were saying, Amy, what you can do, talk about them maybe becoming the photographer in their home, right? If you're adding photos, right? Like, how could you become a photographer? Putting a camera in your dramatic play center, or, a telephone, right? Because I'm sure that's what mom and dad are going to use, right? Their phones, and pretend to take pictures on the phone, right? Of different people. So
Cool.
yeah, lots to do. How about you, Tots, with that small group, the ants?
Yes. This is one time where I would buy something. I would get an ant farm, so that they could see the ants doing what they can't see in the anthill. I would have dirt and, things in the classroom, but you can't have ants in the classroom because that would be a disaster. And have ant books set up and put digging toys outside, books about ants. I think those are the things that pop into my head first.
I think
Maybe a creative center where you can create the ants that you can have in the classroom.
There you go. Yeah.
I was just thinking the same, because like when you said that about having an ant hill, or the real one that you can buy, I was thinking, I wonder if I would want to add the little plastic ants or something. But then my mind immediately went to where you went, Maria, is how could I let the children do that, right? Even if it was just colored rice or, black rice that they brought in or something. And I also think of that digging is being such an essential part, especially depending upon the age of the child, but opportunities to dig and then maybe inquire into other animals that might live underground.
Underground, yeah.
Well, and it made me immediately think sensory. Let's put sand and water together and see if they can make an anthill. Let's give them soil and water and see if they can make an anthill. Just give them sand or just give them soil. Will it stick together? Giving them all different types of materials for that whole sensory play as well.
And then if the building is what they're really more interested in, then, using that to connect to clay and sculpture, depending on which aspect of it they're most intrigued by.
Mhm. On contacting the PE teacher and getting those tunnels, right? And letting them
yeah,
move
yeah.
through the tunnels, because that
Yeah,
is
yeah.
essentially what the ants are doing, right? Are building. I think this goes back to, well, what your last guest talked about, the different schemas, right? Like, what are they really exploring? And really being in tune with what the children, what is the big question that makes them so curious about it,
Well, it
right?
makes
And then
me wonder,
responding that way.
going along with that, you're just your prompt here. When we have ants on our playground, the first question I'm asked every single time they find ants, is this an ouchie ant?
Ah, perspective. Yeah, yeah.
Because we have ants in Vietnam that bite. They're fire
Yeah.
ants. And so that is their first question every single time they see them. Is it an ouchie ant? And
So then you could do a study on what they look like differently so they can
Yes.
make a decision. Yeah.
different
Yeah.
kinds of
Wow.
ants and learning about them.
Well, and then how to care for an ant bite, right? What do you do? How do you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There are all of those layers that it trickles down to. I
Right?
just
And when
think so
Emily
exciting.
mentioned when Emily mentioned PE and tunnels, I thought that dramatic play of you being an ant also helps you
Yeah.
understand that you should not probably go and step on them.
Huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I think
Unless
we're
they're the
all
ouchie
fighting.
ants.
Unless, well, I would say that all ants bite to a certain degree. It just depends what you're doing with them. How ouchy it is.
But I
All
love
right,
ants.
you're
Just
up. Tell us.
sorry.
Oh no, sorry, Amy, go ahead.
I like ants because you can do the ants go marching one by one, the
Yeah.
song. You bring the math into it and the phonemic awareness. There's so much. Ants are amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, and even talking about the power, right? That they're so small, but collectively that cooperation and all the different concepts. So
Well,
right,
that also can lead you into investigating of your own like social surroundings and the jobs and their I don't know, the community that you have.
Mhm.
so true. Yeah, how we all cooperate as a community, because it's true. An ant doesn't live alone, right? When you think about it, I've never thought about it until this very moment, like an aha for Emily Hayes, right? An ant is always a part of that great community, right? So. All right, Maria, you're up now. Tell us about your Head Start math goal response. How would you be responsive to that?
Well, I think that well, kind of math is the easiest one to cover in everything kids do, and you just need to know your program well enough, knowing what are the goals of the year are, and then you just can see an opportunity in the child's play where you can jump into that. Well, go into exactly this prompt. It just happened last week when I brought some stones in. I drew numbers on them and I drew the dots on the others. And then I got a tiny bag of building, no, how do they call them? The blocks, the uniblocks.
Unifix,
Unifix cube. This is what it is. Just in there to see what they're gonna do. And my first come of the morning person is a girl who's been to 2 different schools already. So she knows that if she sees the numbers, she needs to match them with another number, blah, blah, blah. And then she just goes and does the Unifix cubes exactly what the teacher thought. And then there comes a boy who has no clue about numbers whatsoever. So he just stacks those towers on top of each other. And then it turns out that they cannot reach. So they need to put it on the floor. And then it went on and on and on. It ended up with us measuring the heights on, like, I have a big kind of pretend centimeter thing. Well, I mean, it's real, but it's in decimals. But anyway, they were measuring their heights with those numbers on the wall, with those cubes. Well, they cannot count that far to figure out how many Unifix cubes is their height, but I am that big and I'm this big. And they were trying to make the Unifix cubes lines to represent the tallest kid in the class and the shortest kids. And I mean, there you are. I mean, you could teach maybe 10 math goals that you're supposed to teach through the year right in there.
And I think, Maria,
Maria,
you bring up a good point that you have to know your learning goals. You have to know where the kids are supposed to be by the end of the year. So you know when you have these moments where to take them.
Mhm.
No,
or
that's exactly what I was
guiding
going
kids.
to reference, Tots, was that I love that that's how she started. That math can be a part of anything in early learning.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. And to help teachers understand that, I think is challenging. But the key part is what Tots just referenced, is that you do need to know what are those learning outcomes or those learning goals that are developmentally appropriate for the children you're working with. And I've often said that, like, don't give me a cookie cutter curriculum. Just tell me at this age, this school says the children should be able to do. Let me put that back here. So as they play, I can see it.
Yeah.
Right. I don't have to give them a worksheet.
Yeah.
Right. I don't have to even create, like you said, you just put it out there and let them demonstrate it. And just as you just mentioned, there are multiple math learning outcomes in that experience your children demonstrated. And maybe one was actually demonstrating counting, and another was demonstrating only one-to-one correspondence. And there was so much there. There was a part of the play that you mentioned, but you had to know. You kind of had to know in the back of your mind, what is it I can see here? Right.
Yeah.
So that's so important. And I appreciate you bringing that point up, because I do believe that convincing teachers is often hard. And especially if they've come out of a classroom where they've had the math workbook that they have to go through, and, page 1, we're going to count 1 to 5, and they're going to do their handwriting. But I think just knowing your learning outcomes is essential to being intentional in creating your environment.
I have to say that last year I had a teacher who was incredibly traditional, and she really understood play-based learning. She's even said she had to unlearn and relearn everything about teaching. But what helped her was she created a continuum of where the kids were supposed to be and the steps to get there. And that gave her that grounding in, I will get to those learning objectives. And she would just, tick when she saw it. And then she learned that they actually got to those places in better ways and in deeper ways and faster.
Right. I think that's that, giving them the opportunity for meaningful and authentic learning. Right. Like, she didn't have to force feed it. And I think for her, when you talked about learning, unlearning, and relearning, right, she herself as a learner, she put her hands on it and she did it herself. And so then she was able to digest and know them. I think if you had just given it to her and said, here they are, just make this happen. But she had to really think about, what's the prerequisite knowledge for a child to be able to demonstrate this? Okay. And then when they do this, what can they do next? And for her to own that and go through that process of thinking as a professional, what a fantastic learning experience that was for her, so that she could do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and it
Well,
allows
it's also
her
like when you're looking at the kids play, and like, for example, here in a math math center, whatever, math
Just that context.
what the word
Provocation.
Thank you. That was a hard one. You as a teacher need to not only be involved, but actually do your assessments and see where the kids are. And that gives you an opportunity to see, like, okay, those 3 will need help with one-to-one correspondence. Then in your future planning, you can plan some kind of learning provocation for them to actually work on that. And you would know that the other 20 do not actually need it, because they already have it. So it's not going to be a torture of everybody. Let's learn number 1.
Yes. It's respectful, like what we talked about originally, right? It's respectful that each child is on their own individual learning journey. And then it's responsive, because I'm listening and I'm gathering what you do know and what you can demonstrate. And I can use that knowledge to plan, right? I can use it to figure out what I need to do, right? Maybe I need to add a tape measure for some of you, because right? The numbers, you identify them. And for others, you differentiate. One of the things I heard you say, Maria, that's so very important. We've talked so much about the physical environment and that culture, but the teacher responsibility of being an active listener.
Yeah.
Like, all of this doesn't happen unless you as a teacher are actively engaged listener almost at all times. And I think that's where it does get really hard for early childhood teachers because richness is going on over there and I'm missing it, right? And I think in that respect, getting your assistant on board or any adult who's ever in your room so that they understand. I am an advocate for early years education and I will talk to my principal about early childhood and the special ed teacher who's going to come in. And I want them to talk to me. I say, if you're an adult in the room, you are a teacher. Because whether you are certified or not, whatever your qualifications are, the children are learning from you because you're a big person, right? So sharing that identity of we're all listening and we're all responsible for our children's development is critical. So thanks for sharing that because you do have to be an active listener. I'm going to quickly pass along here. There are lots of opportunities here, just another little picture of loose parts. But I want to jump into something that I know is near and dear to Miss Amy's heart, and that's risky play.
Love it.
And I'm going to preface this with, I thank the good Lord above that I gave birth to a daughter. Okay? So I'm just going to be honest here. I value risky play. I think it's so important. And what I think of as risky play, as someone who grew up in the 70s, where I could stay out and play and climb trees. My neighbor still laughs about, Emily, we always worried because you were on your rooftop and singing and dancing on the rooftop of your house. I think it's extraordinarily valuable, right? That it helped me learn to assess. And today I'm almost like a chicken, right? When I think about that little 5-year-old who would do those types of things, that I'm so grateful I had those opportunities. And I think in our world today, children are overly protected because they're too delicate and fragile. And I think that's part of where we've got to anchor all that we do and believe in the image of the child. What do we genuinely believe about children? Do we think accidents are going to happen? Absolutely. Do we think they are opportunities for learning in those accidents? For sure, right? Maria, going back to your conversations about working with parents, I think that's the biggest part of this discussion with risky play, helping parents understand, right? We're not forcing your child into dangerous situations. We are allowing some things because we see them as rich learning opportunities. Are we going to be there and present, always supervising with a watchful eye? Absolutely. We have responsibility. That duty of care is a true responsibility of ours. But if we always treat them like they should be in little bubbles, and if our ultimate goal is to keep them from any harm, regardless, and we're to blame, then we're approaching our roles the wrong way. I think we do have an expectation that we keep our children safe, but that doesn't mean that we prevent them from engaging in any risk-taking, right? I think as an IB educator, so working with the PYP school, I love that that's one of our learner profile traits, being a risk taker. Because if IB says that children should be risk takers, not just children, but people, then we have to give them the opportunity to take risks, right? We can't prevent them from that. Height and elevation, there are certain things that you can do. I often told my child, even as a little girl, if it's taller than you, if you're higher than your height, you think, then you're probably high enough, right? But you can kind of scaffold that idea of how a child assesses risks. So we're not saying just go and, be wild, and they're going to want to do that, some of them. But we do listen to them. We do respond to their needs. The trajectory schema and those types of things, they're going to try things. That's how they're built. That's how they're wired. So we want them to be safe. We want the children in their presence to be safe as well. Rough and tumble play and play fighting. I think we went through a season, right? I'm showing my age now, but when the Power Rangers came out and everything on the playground became wah, 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 and like intention to hurt almost, right? Like it was that really rough play. And it's a learning opportunity for children. How do you respond to that? Not prevent it, but how do you respond to it? That, for one, does the other person agree to this type of play? How do you help the child understand that you can observe your playmates' interactions and you should respond? So the opportunity for empathy and seeing, I see Amy's looking a little anxious about this climbing this tree with me. I can say to her, Amy, you stay at the bottom in case I fall. You lay down in case I fall so I land on something soft, right? But you negotiate, you help them see how to assess their own needs and how to respond for themselves. But I don't believe you should prevent it. I started to put a picture in here of my children in Shanghai when we were making stone soup, and the little boy who is using a knife with a blade that was this long and this thick, and he's using it like a proper chef would, right? And yes, I was there with him, and I wouldn't let him use it on his own, just, in the kitchen center, right? But how do we give them the opportunities, and not just give them the opportunities, but how do we allow them to find them and just respond to them and not prevent them? So one of the things, and I think, Amy, I got this from one of the things you've shared on your website. So make sure you go there. Is, like I said, all of this really goes back to what we believe about children. If we see them as fragile, I remember in a workshop, and my principal was there, and I was doing a workshop on the image of the child. Tell me the 3 words that you think of for children, the image of the child. And one of the words one of the leaders said was dependent. And I was like, oh, how do I address this? Because if we believe that they are strong, capable, independent, competent, all those rich words that an early years educator believes, then why do we not trust them when it comes to risky play, right? So at the heart of this part of our conversation, when Amy asked if I would do risky, I thought, this is just a way to think about stuff, right? Like, this is, how do you think about it? And like I said, I open with complete honesty that it is hard for me. I have to restrain myself, right? As a mama, and with the boys who, that's how they learn, is that active play that's full of risk taking. So one of the things that from the article, I love this, when in doubt, apply the 17-second rule. You resist the urge to engage. And for 17 seconds, force yourself to just observe, right? If you still feel like it's unsafe after 17 seconds, sure. Now, this doesn't mean the child's climbed up the tree and he's fallen and he's crying. I don't wait 17 seconds, right? But if he's climbing, wait 17 seconds. I was with a child on the playground just last week, and he was, I think the rule at our school is you can only climb to the second branch. And I'm like, some second branches are way up there, right? But you ask the child, do you feel safe there? Can you get down independently from where you are, right? Like, have them think ahead, because I think sometimes that's the part that they miss, is they're engaging and they don't think about the effects, right? That cause and effect part, the consequence of, I've done this and this will happen. And so if you just ask them, just prompt them that. And the other thing was that study that showed that they would have to engage in risky play for 3 hours a day for 10 years before they would need medical attention. That was very liberating for this mama, right? I've said if I had a little boy, he would probably be so wimpy, because I would try to keep him safe, overly so, right? And I know that about myself. And because I do, with little boys in particular in my classroom, and I've had a little girl in Shanghai that was just the same, I have to restrain myself. And it all goes back to my image of the child and my self-awareness, because I do know I've got that mama's heart that wants to protect and nurture and keep safe. But what I believe about children kind of overshadows all that, to say, trust, give them space, trust the children, and be there for them when they need you. Any thoughts, Amy? And then, like I said, you said this was, I'm sorry, I've been sharing and you haven't seen it. You've said this was very important to you. Is there anything else you would like to add about the risky play?
I think a really important thing to remember with risky play is, before you make decisions about risky play, have the conversation with your school administrators so that you understand where they're coming from, but come prepared. Don't come in like, I'm ready for a battle, but know the reasons why you want risky play, the types of risky play you're willing to accept, the ones you're like, okay, I can give up on that one, but I really, really want these. And then how you plan on addressing it with families, because families are, they're going to be the ones that say, wait, you let my child do that? Yes, and here's why I'm letting your child do that.
And to build on that, there is the cultural piece. You know, as international schools, we need to keep that in mind. Like in India, I would go very slow in introducing risky play because of the cultural approach towards children. I mean, they're called baby, you know, and like second and third graders, it's natural for them to be called baby by adults. And it's a very, you know, term of endearment. But that says, and the kids come and don't know how to wipe themselves, and the DDs do that for them. I mean, you know, so in that environment, to go full force on risky play is going to backfire. You have to be careful.
And I think going with that in mind, when you approach those conversations, like Amy was referencing, that I know I've had conversations, and you don't know our population, Emily. And it's so true. I think that pause, like you're encouraging, Tots, is I'm new to this environment here in Istanbul, right? I have to take time myself even. I can look at the rules that have been shared with the students, right? But knowing that and developing that awareness of what are our expectations as a school, and then culturally though, how does the culture, what is their image of the child? And I think like you did, Maria, you shared a beautiful example. You didn't just bulldoze over the parents to tell them this is the right way. You allowed them to see the beauty and hear and see the opportunity that was provided, as opposed to just saying, this is how we do it. And a good early childhood, you would do it, right? Instead, it was more of, we're learning together, and I'd like you to consider, right, the opportunities that have been provided.
Well, I also think that's with what you've mentioned, the kids from like in your place would not jump into risky play themselves yet.
That's true. That's
so, and I think risky play comes from the children. And then this is when you start discussing it with all other adults on duty, because like this is what happens at this point in my school. Everybody has their own vision of what's risky and what's not. A couple of my kids decided to use the little wooden houses, climbing up on them and going down, using them as a slide. I was fine with them because I saw that they could actually pull themselves up the roof, and they were like, we've talked about how to do it without hurting each other, and how like they shouldn't be pushing on top, blah, 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 and why and what. But there was a teacher who approached straight away and said, no, you cannot go on top of the house. And then the kids look at her and I look at her, and then we're like, okay. And they get down. Yes, they need to get down. I said, okay, guys, you wait, and like you go play somewhere else. And then I said, like, why can't they go on the house? And then she looks at me and she doesn't have an answer. But it's a house, it's not a slide. I said, why not? And that creates like, then we had a whole pre-primary meeting about the rules for the playground and why this is that and this is the other. Well, right now the whole entire school uses those two houses as slides. Every single teacher is mad at me, but oh well.
So a good point there too, then, Maria. You have to be willing to accept that for a little while, right? Until they develop that understanding and appreciation that you already have.
And again, like there are some kids who already have scratches, but there are some kids who actually want to go, but they can't. And another big thing with risky play is you never help a child up.
Right.
Like whatever they can do, they can do. You do not help them up. I mean, like you can help them down because that might be something that they wouldn't be able to figure out themselves yet. But again, what one of you said, like you need to talk to them about it. Like, okay, you're going up, you're going to a third branch, but how are you going to get down? Do you see the branches underneath? Blah, blah. My personal thing from the list that you had a couple of pages ago, I have difficulties with fighting games at school, because I have 2 boys, and rough play was part of, like, I am a girl and I always loved rough plays, and I was always in fight with someone. And I think it's very important for your body awareness and building strength. But when there are a lot of kids, like, it's not like a group of children who decided to play that game and adults supervising them and seeing where it goes, but there are another 50 kids around who can jump in within whatever second. And the 17-second rule would be way too much, because by that time people are going to get hurt. And also, you do not know what, like, I say 4 kids who are playing a tumble game here or fighting game here, they know what they're doing and what's the purpose. Somebody who is observing them, like, say a little boy who is not ready for that, he's gonna have a perspective that, oh, in this school people are so rough, they can beat you up.
Yeah.
I mean, it gives so many different messages to different stakeholders that, like, I personally feel very unsafe with allowing that.
No, that's a very good point. And I think too, like, I love the idea that the first group, the 2 or 4, they knew their intention, they knew their purpose.
Yeah.
But then as it grows, how do you either cut it off or make sure everyone's on the same page?
But also, there are some stakeholders that you're not even aware of. Those who are observing from a side, they
Yeah.
might have their own perspectives that would not be the ones that you want them to have.
Yeah.
And
Fear.
like, when we claim that the children learn through play, they learn the real world through play, they learn how it works, right? And they practice acting in the real world, especially with all the wars and all the things happening right now. You do not really want them to practice fighting. Even though when tumbling down and, like, physical things, it's needed. But I would prefer that to happen outside of school, in the families, with close friends, with your relatives.
I think that brings in the cultural piece, and we should never do what we're not comfortable with, because that subconscious message will be sent to the children.
Mhm.
And I think too, like you said originally, Maria, is what do they initiate? Like, you would never send them out and say, okay, today I want Johnny and Bob to fight, right? And so that would not be something I hope that you would do, right? But I think, and I love, Tots, you're saying, what are you comfortable with, right? And you're so right, Maria, 17 seconds is going to be way too long sometimes, and especially if it's the fighting element, right? The climbing and those types of things. But the fighting element, you heard me say, I would immediately be like, oh, I'm a person who says, I don't like ugly, and fighting to me is ugly, right? And my children would know that about me. And so I would say, this is looking a little ugly to me, right? And it might be just that I offer that and then it's done.
But what I
right?
love about the list that Emily included in here is the fact that we're not saying all of these can be done or need to be done at school. Some of these can be risky play that's done at home, like rough and tumble play. If I'm at a school, I personally probably wouldn't want rough and tumble play, just because of a myriad of other reasons. The fear aspect, like, there's a lot of things that go into it. How am I going to keep my eyes on all the children and make sure everybody is safe? But there's others that I don't mind doing. Fear of getting lost, hiding in the bushes. How much fun is it when the kids are outside playing to play hide and seek? As long as they know that when the bell rings, they have to come and line up. To me, that's not a big risk.
Right. And this is just the 6 key factors that have been identified. So this is not a please encourage all of this in the classroom. Remember, hi, I'm Emily Hayes, and I'm grateful to be the mother of a daughter. All right, ladies. So one of the things I would encourage anyone who's a practitioner in the early years to do is an environment assessment. And I think you have to start with you, right? Reflect. And I've talked about it multiple times. Reflect on what you believe about children, what you value in your space. What are those essential elements? When I had you close your eyes and envision, what would the ideal classroom look like? Start with you, be honest, right? And then empathize. Actually think about being a child in that space. I encourage everyone, like, get down on all fours and crawl through your space. Like if you're working with really little children, sit on the floor in one of the centers and look at the shelves, right? Really take on the role of a child in the space, because that's who you're co-constructing it with and for. Then think critically about it. Evaluate your space. Think about how it supports the movement. How do different spaces invite children into learning? And are there places or materials that you may say are not safe, right? Like I know there was a time in the US that everything had a bumper pad around it, even in the 5-year-old kindergarten classroom, right? Like don't overdo it. I'm not saying those types of things. We do want our children to be a part of maintaining safety for themselves as well. And then I can't reiterate the importance of listening, right? I think as a teacher, that is an evaluative tool that is irreplaceable. Listen to your children. And when I say listen, it's not just what they're saying, but it's their actions. What are their actions saying to you? What are their behaviors demonstrating that may need to change your environment in some way? And so in those regards, then act. Make any changes that are needed, respond to your children, respond to your curriculum, right? I know when we've got different units of inquiry we do in the PYP school, maybe our dramatic play always changes with that, right? But I would also encourage that dramatic play area, involve your children, invite them. What would you like for it to be? We're learning about community helpers. Could we change this into a new community space? So take time to do an environment assessment. And Amy, I apologize because I've gone a little longer, it looks like. But I
That
want
is
to thank
okay.
everyone. I want to encourage you all to co-construct that environment with your children. Remember, it's not yours, it's ours. Listen to your children and trust yourself in them. I think that's the big one for early childhood teachers, especially when they've come from places that are very program driven. Trust your children. If you listen to them, trust them, they're going to provide those opportunities for learning.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Emily, we thank you so much for sharing your insight and your knowledge with us. Thank you, Tats and Maria, for joining us today. And thank you to everybody who's going to watch this on the website later.
Yes.
Been a wonderful session to be able to get together and learn together.
No, it's fantastic. I love the active participation, the small groups. Maria, thanks for jumping in. Tots, it was beautiful to reconnect with you. And Amy, so appreciative of your hosting this. I know this supports your doctorate research, but you're providing such a rich opportunity for our teachers. So thank you for organizing and sharing.
Thank you. All right. I will be sending out an email tomorrow, which has a link to the website with this recording that will be placed on it. And then if you're willing, I would appreciate, I will also include in that email a Google form where you can give me feedback about the professional learning, or you can sign up to do a quick interview with me. So thank you. I'm going to stop recording right now, but thank you.